Hey there, Retro Games fans, this is Andy C from Pieces of 8-Bit. Welcome to this week's The Bit Between, where we're going to be doing something perhaps a little bit unusual. So, obviously you can see on the screen I've got SSX 3 up, and basically what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be having a look at this on the GBA. So when you think about SSX Tricky or SSX 3, which are the two games we're going to be looking at today, you're going to be thinking about the PS2, right? You're going to be thinking about potentially the Xbox or maybe the GameCube, but for me, certainly the PlayStation 2. I remember seeing SSX, the original SSX, the first time on the PS2 and just being blown away by all of it, the big air, the ridiculous tricks, the amazing soundtrack. And ultimately this game was peak early 2000s arcade snowboarding. It's fantastic. But like I say, today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. As you can see, it's a little bit pixelated on my screen, and that's because this is the GBA version of SSX 3. We're going to be heading back over to the Game Boy Advance as part of my month with I'm living with the Game Boy Advance, and I have played these games, certainly SSX 3 probably more than SSX Tricky, on the Game Boy Advance. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be having a look at what happens when you try to squeeze one of the most over-the-top extreme sports franchises onto a tiny little handheld screen. And honestly, it's not always that pretty. But let's do a little bit of background before we dive into that. So the big picture then, SSX Tricky launched in 2001 on the PS2 and on the Xbox and on the GameCube of course, and then it arrived on the GBA late in 2002, and then SSX 3 followed in 2003. It hit consoles in October of that year and landed on the GBA just a few weeks later in November. Now these games really weren't built for handheld. They were They were scaled down ports of massive console games. And the console games, of course, they were huge. SSX 3 alone became the first game in that series to sell over 1 million copies. And across the early 2000s, the SSX franchise sold millions overall, cementing itself ultimately as one of EA's biggest extreme sports series. I absolutely love the original SSXs on the PlayStation 2. They're just fantastic, and I still play them today. They're great. They just so pick up and play. They're great fun playing split screen. They're just fantastic. So unsurprisingly, they were smash hits on the consoles. The console version of SSX 3 scored in the 90s on Metacritic. That is in elite territory. SSX Tricky was also universally acclaimed on consoles. The thing about Tricky was it was always, for me, it felt like the original SSX, just with a load of extra polish, lessons learned, just improved in just about every aspect. Fantastic looking game. But what about the Game Boy Advance version? Well, you could be forgiven for not even realising that it existed on the Game Boy Advance. And yeah, there's probably a good reason for that, and that is that on the Game Boy Advance, the reviews were average at best. So SSX Tricky, very much average. SSX 3, even further down in the reviews. Very mixed reception. It received a lot of criticism around its performance and the controls, and I can definitely vouch for that. We will talk about that shortly. In other words, these games had a bit of a reputation and not a desired one like their big console counterparts. As for sales, it's a little bit tricky to ascertain. They certainly never came close to the success of the original console release and were somewhat more of a curiosity than a must-have in the GBA library. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to jump into both SSX Tricky and SSX 3 on the Game Boy Advance. So I'll play them for a fairly short amount of time. I've played quite a lot of SSX 3. I haven't played a lot of SSX Tricky on the GBA. And I say quite a lot of SSX 3. I mean, this is probably a bit of a spoiler here, but it's not great. It's okay at best. But let's have a look at it. Let's try and disconnect ourselves from those preconceptions, I suppose. And let's have a look and see whether they were actually worth playing back in the day, and more importantly, are they worth playing now? So let's dive in. We're going to start with SSX Tricky. We're just going to do a quick race And then we're going to do the same again with SSX3, and then I'll give you my final thoughts. Obviously, if you have any thoughts on SSX3 or SSX Tricky on the Game Boy Advance specifically, let me know. But obviously also let me know your memories of this fantastic snowboarding series. It was absolutely amazing. I just love these games, as I've probably pointed out. So hopefully this is going to be one of those moments where I don't completely ruin the experience for myself by going back and playing it on the GBA. And who knows? I'm being a little bit ahead of the review here, so who knows? Maybe they're not as bad as perhaps some people remember them, or I remember them for that matter. Let's dive straight in with some gameplay, and let's have a look. Okay, so let's have a look at the intro sequence here. Now, this is quite painful because I'm playing this emulated and it is very pixelated. That is absolutely horrible. So yes, SSX Tricky on a smaller screen. That's not going to look too bad, but yeah, certainly compared to its PS2, GameCube, and Xbox counterpart, it looks pretty horrific. But that's not a fair assessment because we are playing this on a tiny little screen here. Now, the thing to remember, of course, is that you would have been playing this in 2001, 2002, well, 2002 on the Game Boy Advance. So, yeah, it's gonna be on the old GBA. You're not gonna have that backlit screen for a start. Yeah, so you've got to forgive the resolution a little bit. Because obviously this is on a small screen and it's on a Game Boy Advance and on PlayStation 2. Let's go with Elise. That's all I always used to like playing Elise's character. So we're just going to do a race. So obviously we're also going to be on D-pads, which is going to be interesting. And we've got quite awkward shoulder buttons, especially if you have the SP. If you're playing this on the SP, the shoulder buttons were a little bit tricky. So this should feel familiar. Okay, right, already the first thing you notice is the draw distance is shocking. There we go, I'm ahead now. Obviously we've got a lot less buttons to play with. Graphically you can see it's pretty dire. Now you could be forgiven for saying, you know, hey look, you know, don't be too harsh on this because you're playing this on a tiny little screen on the GBA, but then you know what? It's a 32-bit console, and there are much better looking games here. It's hard, so the controls are a little bit weird through the checkpoint here. This doesn't feel particularly familiar. If you're used to playing SSX on the PS2 or later versions of SSX, I can't figure out. Oh, there we go. Trick. There we go. Great. I was trying to figure out how to do the tricks and I wasn't quite sure. It's very cumbersome. Very cumbersome indeed. Yeah, you see the draw distance is pretty hopeless. So, and I think to be fair, there's only so much that you can really forgive, being as it's on the. I'm not sure what happened there. I tried to use the shoulder buttons to do a trick, being on the SP, and I tell you what, it's actually giving me a little bit of motion sickness because it is really bad. Now, and again, you know, obviously I'm playing this on a larger screen. It's not designed for this sort of screen. I'm not sure what happened there. Or there. Yeah, the controls aren't great. I mean, on a PS2 controller, obviously full-blown controller, you've got analog sticks. You know, it just lends itself to that. Let me actually do a trick that time. There we go. That was a bit better, wasn't it? I think I'm holding down the button here to go faster, and that's not really worked. It's really not great at all. Okay, how far we got down here? I'm in 5th place. Yeah, and I think the problem as well is ultimately that this is a game that is designed for a big console. The way that, you know, the controller, the speed, the draw distance, the graphics, everything is designed to be a game that you would play on the PS2. So I think, you know, ultimately, it's almost impossible to compare it to its bigger counterpart. You know, it's quite difficult to say, oh, you know, this is better or worse than this and the version on the PS2. And it is worse, but You almost have to treat it as a game in its own right, I suppose. Okay, how are we doing here? I'm in first now. I don't quite know how that's happened. You just can't compare it. I mean, it's so different to play. I mean, obviously you've got, you know, the D-pad control is just so difficult to get to grips with. It doesn't feel particularly natural. Draw distance is just not there. There we go, we're finished now. It's very different. It's a very, very different game. So if we were to look at it from the point of view of a game specifically for the Game Boy, I think that's probably, or the Game Boy Advance I should say, that's probably how we are going to need to assess it at the end. But that is a quick race on SSX Tricky on the Game Boy Advance. So what we're going to do now is we're going to hop across and have a look at what it looks like on the what SSX 3 looks like even. Get my words out there. What SSX 3 looks like on the Game Boy Advance, and if it is an improvement on this one. So let's hop across now and have a look at SSX 3. Okay, so here we go. This is a game that I've played a little bit more. I've had this game a little bit longer on the Game Boy Advance. So I have played this a little bit, but I'll be honest with you. Let's go for a quick play, and let's just do a race. So let's pick Elise again. There we go. Yeah, let's go all of that. We've got all of the usual equipment changes. You know, we can change the board and what she's wearing and all those kind of things once we've got those unlocked. So yes, I have played this one a little bit more. But I say play it a lot. I haven't played it loads because it is not, you know, I've not enjoyed it. I've not got into it. And I would say, look, straight away out of the gate. I'm not saying out of the gate. I'm not quite sure what's going on here. It does look a little bit better. It still looks pretty awful. And again, you know, on a smaller screen, yeah, it probably doesn't look quite so bad. It feels very cumbersome. The draw distance is still a massive problem. So it is just a case of just dealing with what's in front of you. It just looks awful. It looks really, really terrible. And it is not a pleasant experience on a bigger screen. So one thing I would definitely say is don't feel the need to play this on an emulator. If you're going to play this game, if you really feel the need to play this game, then definitely play it on the GBA. Definitely don't play it on an emulator, because that is not going to work. Right, so I mean, the frame rate, you might think that's to do with the recording. It's not. That is actually how it is. It's pretty low. And again, you could probably be forgiven for thinking this might be the emulator, and there might be an element of that. Sometimes we do get a bit of frame drop out on emulators, but you know, from my experience of playing this actually on the Game Boy Advance, I would say it's not that great on there either. I think this game is worse. I think it's worse. I think it's trying to do more. There's some serious weird graphics pop in there for a moment. I think it's trying to achieve more, and I think as a result it achieves less. It is quite gut-wrenchingly awful to watch and play through. The soundtrack's okay, I'd say, if we're going to give it anything at all. It's very difficult to know what's going on. The tricks are harder to do for some reason. I don't really understand why. They just don't seem to work as well. Oh, we actually landed one there. It wasn't quite the right time to do it. But yeah, it's not a lot of fun to play, I'll be honest with you. It is really, really difficult. Am I at the bottom already? No, I'm not. Oh, I fell over. That was my own fault. I can't blame the game for that. What is that? Now, obviously, if you're playing this, this game came out a little bit later. This came out tail end of 2003. So if you're playing this on the Game Boy Advance, you might at least have the advantage of playing this on the SP. So you have at least got a backlit screen, which is going to make your life slightly better than if you played the original one, SSX Tricky. I should say not the original SSX, but if you played SSX Tricky on the Game Boy Advance, you may well have, unfortunately, had to play it on the non-backlit screen, which would have been quite painful, I would imagine. Oh, a bit of rail time here. Can't see what's going on. The camera angle is terrible. I can't see where I'm going. Oh my days, it's really bad. And of course, a thing about SSX3 as well is if you played, I mean, this is a fantastic game. Absolutely fantastic game on the PS2. You had the Conquer the Mountain where you basically could go the whole distance from the top of the mountain all the way down to the bottom, and there were lots of different routes that you could take and all those kind of things, which made the game absolutely fantastic. A lot of it was their favourite in the series. I think it was probably the most accomplished of the SSX games. I think what came after was, I don't know, it tried to be a bit too trendy. It was trying to be a bit too clever. Things like Tor. I liked Tor. I didn't love Tor. It was okay. Tricky and SSX3, I think, are the two best entries in the SSX series, in my personal opinion. And yeah, they're both fantastic for sort of different reasons, really. I liked the sort of freedom of SSX3. I loved the kind of madness of the original SSX Tricky and how it improved on the original SSX game on the PS2. This, however, does not, on here, SSX3 does not improve on SSX Tricky, in my opinion. I mean, it's difficult. They're both pretty bad. This just feels so cumbersome. Like I said, the draw distance is terrible, and like I said as well, I just don't think there's a good enough excuse for that. I think they could have done something different. Maybe it was the wrong thing to introduce this kind of game series to the Game Boy Advance. But you know, there are games on here that just look so much better. I just don't think there's any reason for it to look so bad. You know, I mean, the number of pixels that you're dealing with on the screen is very small. I get that. Maybe that's a reason not to do it. I mean, I played SSX on the PSP, and that is a much better proposition. And yeah, okay, yes, the PSP is a much more powerful console. It's a much newer console. You know, I mean, this is just terrible. I don't think that's the whole problem. I don't think that the technical capability of the GBA is the issue here. I just think it's a really poor game. I just don't think it's been well enough thought through for this platform. I think they've just tried to cram a game that is for a big console and on a big TV, strip it right back to make it fit, make it work, and I just don't think it does. It just gives me a headache. And maybe it was just the wrong thing for EA to do. You know, but we didn't need to wait too many years before we got it on a handheld on the PSP, of course. We're at the end, and you know what? I'm kind of glad that we are. I don't think you're going to necessarily need my final thoughts on this, because I think you can probably tell. But yeah, let's get my final thoughts anyway. Let's talk about what I thought about these two games, and yeah, whether I think you should go and check them out, how they hold up today. And I will talk a little bit about actually playing it directly on the GBA, because you may feel that this is a little bit of an unfair review because I'm playing it through the emulator, but we'll talk about that anyway. So let's dive into my final thoughts on SSX Tricky and SSX3 on the Game Boy Advance. I'll see you there. So let's grab my final thoughts on SSX Tricky and SSX3 on the GBA, as if you really need them. If you've just watched that gameplay, I think you're gonna work out where this is going. It's unusual for me to pick a game that I don't ultimately like, because I normally pick games that I think, you know what, this is a game that I enjoy, I'm going to play it. So the reviews that I usually do are pretty positive, to be honest. Unfortunately, this is not going to be one of those moments. I'm a huge fan of SSX. So if I played SSX Tricky, if I played SSX 3, even Tor on the PlayStation 2, then you would see a review that is pretty glowing, because I love those games. I love everything about those games. I love the pick up and play nature of them. They're just fantastic fun. They're just great games. They stand the test of time. They're fantastic. I just don't think that this is one of those games. I just don't think that... I suppose in many ways, you could argue that, you know, it's an unfair comparison. You look at how it's sort of pixelated on the GBA, and you say, you know what, it's not a fair comparison comparing it to the PS2, and that's fair. That's an absolutely fair statement to make. But the reality of it is that maybe EA shouldn't have released it on the GBA then. If you can't do it, if you can't make it work on that platform, I think from a hardware, from a power point of view, probably the GBA could have pulled it off. From a screen point of view, it clearly doesn't pull it off. It's too pixelated. There's no draw distance. Playing it or trying to play it on an emulator on a bigger screen just exaggerates that even more and just makes it worse. But that again is not really a fair assessment. So I just don't think that EA should have brought it to the GBA. You can play it handheld. I mean, people might say, well, maybe it's just not a game you can play handheld. Well, I don't agree with that, because on the PSP a few years later we had SSX on Tour, which is my least favourite of the SSX outings. But SSX Tour on the PSP is an accomplished game. It's okay. It works really well. So you can play it on a handheld. Maybe this was just a bit too early. Maybe that's the issue there. Is it's not that EA failed to cram it onto the GBA. Maybe it's just the GBA was not a platform that we should have played SSX on. So that's the reality of it. I have played, as I mentioned before, quite a bit of SSX 3 actually on the Game Boy Advance itself. I have tried to give it a good chance. So I've not just played these games emulated. I played SSX 3 a fair bit, SSX Tricky a little bit. And the same problems are there. It's not because I'm emulating this that's the issue. In fact, if anything, emulating it, the controls are easier because you're playing it on a proper controller. So things like the shoulder buttons for doing the tricks on the GBA, especially on the SP, which is what I played it on, are problematic. So you've got the issue with how you hold it and trying to do the tricks with the shoulder buttons on the SP. It's just really awkward and fiddly. Obviously, if you play it on the original GBA, it's a little bit better, but then you're fighting against the fact that the screen isn't backlit, which is a real problem for this game as well. You're already struggling with the graphics and the draw distance. If you play it on the original Game Boy Advance, you're going to then be struggling with lighting as well, which just makes that situation worse. So there's no good place to play this. It just isn't great. So what do I think in terms of scores then? Well, if I was to score both of them, I would say that SSX Tricky, I would say maybe a 2.5. If I'm feeling generous, I would give it a 2.5. It's okay, it's playable, it's okay, and maybe if you really wanted to do play a bit of snowboarding on a handheld device back in the day, you could pick up SSX Tricky and you would have an okay experience. You might enjoy it for a short time. SSX 3 on the other hand, I would give, if I was being generous, I would give it a 2. I think in reality, yeah, I'll be generous. I'll give it a 2. It is borderline whether I give it less than a 2. Yeah, let's call it a 2 and let's be kind, because it is a worse game than Tricky. SSX 3 is a worse game than Tricky on the GBA, and it's such a shame because if I would be scoring these in the 4s and the 4.5s, probably the lowest score would be Tour. I'd probably be giving that a 3.5. So ultimately these are great games on their big console counterparts. They're fantastic fun, as I've said several times now. On the GBA, not so much. Would I recommend that for you to go and dig them out? Well, no. As if I needed to tell you that, I would not. And one thing I would definitely not recommend is playing them on an emulator. They just don't emulate very well at all. I think if you're going to play it on any emulator, I would suggest something like the Retro Flag GPI case, which looks like a little sort of Game Boy, and you can put a Raspberry Pi 0 in there, and that obviously has a smaller screen. So you might find that emulating on that is a better proposition than emulating on a full-size screen. You might find that's a little bit more palatable. But the controls aren't great. The sound, it's got that good soundtrack, but obviously hampered a little bit by the sound quality, certainly on the original GBA. So yeah, all in all, I would give it a miss. There's so many better games to play on the GBA, and if you want to play SSX, go and play the full-size console versions. It's still incredibly playable. I played Tricky and 3 quite recently, actually, on the PS2, and they are just still absolutely amazing, fantastic games, great fun. So go check those out. So that is it for my rather depressing view of SSX Tricky and SSX 3 on the Game Boy Advance. Yeah, give it a wide berth. Yes, well, thanks for watching. If you did enjoy those games, please do let me know in the comments. Maybe you played it for a bit more. Maybe you figured out how to get the best of those games. Obviously, this is just an opinion piece, so please just take it for as it comes. If you really enjoyed these games, I can only apologise to you, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on why you think they're a lot better than what my review suggests. So go check, go pop some comments in below. like I said, let me know all your memories of SSX as well. At some point in the future, probably in quite a way off, when we've run out of consoles to do on the month with, I'm actually going to spend a bit of time looking at all of the versions of SSX and spend a lot more time playing with them through the month. So we are going to be looking at that, but that's a way off yet. So yeah, and if you're interested in that, just stay tuned. Drop a like on here if you feel the need, and yeah, please do hit that subscribe button as well so you don't miss out on any content. Obviously, hit the bell icon to get notified of anything new coming up. But yeah, that's probably it for all of that. Coming up on the channel, we are going to be talking about some of the strangest things you may or may not have known about the GBA, or may just have forgotten about. So we're going to be talking about that on Friday and just do a bit of a countdown. So there's some quite interesting and unusual facts about this little console, so we're going to be talking about that. And then next week, of course, it will be the end of the month, so we will be talking about what it has been like to live with the GBA for the last few weeks, and yeah, I'll be giving you all my opinions and usual hardware stats and what games I've been playing. We'll be talking about all of that next week, so stay tuned for that as well. That is it then. So yes, that just leaves me to say then, please do all take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next one. Until then, bye for now.